Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here, and I'm with one of my favorite authors in the entire world, Valentine Low. You wrote Courtiers. This was an incredible book, but you kind of burst on the scene with this incredible investigative piece about some secret bullying allegations that were whispered about, but not necessarily known in the mainstream. And I had the pleasure of interviewing you a while ago about this book, but I thought of you recently again because in the book, Meghan Markle is alleged to have threatened Prince Harry. I don't want to be with you unless you confirm our relationship. And Prince Harry goes out of his way to do this with the palace's help. With Jason Knopf, they put together a sternly worded release that has recently been yanked from the website. And I wanted to know what your reaction was. Is this removal significant? Because I thought of you immediately when I saw those headlines.
I must admit, I didn't know it had been taken from the website. Maybe because it's sort of ancient history now. If he's no longer a working member of the royal family, so what's the kind of relevance of having it up there? I think. But you've always got to watch out for things which can get removed from websites. When King Charles was still Prince of Wales and no one knew what Camilla would be called, the official line from Clarence House was that Camilla would be Princess Consort. The Clarence House statement on their website that she would be known as Princess Consort disappeared one day, and some journalists noticed, and we all rang up Clarence's house and said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, no, nothing to see here. It's all fine. We're just tidying up the website." And we thought, none of us believed them. But we had to print what they were saying because that's what they were saying. And lo and behold, a small number of years later, the Queen says, she'll be known as Queen Consort.
Valentine Low, we're 2 minutes in and you're already dropping bombs. I love talking to you. This is I'm already loving this conversation. Now, I really have enjoyed watching not only reading the book, but watching you tell the story of how you secured this incredible scoop about this bullying investigation. But throughout the process of watching you discuss it, I've really not seen you talk about whether or not there were any hesitations when it came, when you were approached about it, was there any doubt in your mind that these could be authentic? Or was there just so much evidence thrown at you initially that you thought, I'm onto something here and I've really got to pursue it?
The central allegation, I was convinced of the truth of it. I was very familiar with the content of the famous email that Jason Knopf sent to the private secretary, saying that this was going on. And also I spoke to other people who backed up the story, sort of witnesses to the sort of thing which had gone on. And I saw WhatsApp messages that had happened, which again backed up the same thing. I had conversations, not lengthy conversations, but I had conversations with some of the people who were bullied. And it's interesting, they didn't want to have long or detailed conversations because they were still so traumatized by what they'd gone through. But the conversations, were long enough, detailed enough for me to be convinced of the truth of it. And my bosses at the paper at the Times, and also the newspaper's lawyer, we went to great lengths to make sure the story was copper bottom. It was absolutely tight because we'd seen what had happened with Meghan and the Mail on Sunday when they printed their story, which they quoted from the letter which Meghan had sent to her father. They got sued, and we all know what happened there. Meghan won. So we wanted to make sure there were going to be no holes in our story, that Meghan, obviously very litigious, could exploit. And and what was interesting is that before publication, we got these long letters from Meghan's lawyers, threatening all sorts of stuff and saying the story was made up and it was a smear campaign, all sorts of things, and denying detail. And after we published, didn't hear a word from them. Not one word.
Also, I thought it was interesting because it felt like at the time, Meghan's team really tried to paint this as another smear campaign by the palace. But in reality, it really didn't. It reflected quite poorly on the palace, that the palace would allow something like that to actually happen. So I didn't understand Harry and Meghan's team trying to blame it on the palace and Harry specifically.
You're quite right there, Kinsey, quite right. They claimed it was a smear campaign by the palace, but I know that the people who I was talking to me were not talking with palace permission, and they knew it wouldn't necessarily go down well with the palace. And yes, it did reflect badly on the palace, because what the palace did, was nothing. So when these allegations were raised, sort of 2.5 years before I wrote the story, it sort of went up the chain, and people were they were paralyzed. They didn't know what to do because of course they hadn't encountered this sort of situation before. And a lot of them were, I think, secretly a bit frightened of Meghan. She was also a force to be reckoned with, and they didn't want to tangle with Harry. And so they did nothing. So these people who were victims of the bullying, the alleged bullying, felt no one had spoken up for them.
Yeah, right. And you actually have said that you had little to no regret about releasing this before the Oprah Winfrey interview because, some of the people approached you concerned about the Oprah Winfrey interview, and it was deliberate on their part. They said, before Meghan has the opportunity to internationally brand herself as a victim, we'd like for you to know our story, which I think is incredibly important.
Exactly. What was hilarious was that in Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary, they got one of their, members of staff to claim rather pompously on camera that, Valentine Low has even admitted that this was deliberately released before Oprah. And it wasn't a question of admitting. I'd always been perfectly open about the fact, as you say, the reason why they wanted this out there was to say there's another narrative out there. Meghan had been portraying herself as a victim, and they were saying, well, there are other victims here too. And they knew full well, and I knew full well, that if that story had come out after Oprah, it just no one would have noticed for a start, and also it would come across as sort of sour grapes. Meghan saying this, well, we're going to say that. It would have a completely different impact. So it was really important to get it out before Oprah. And it was a slight race against time because there was a point at which it was due to come out initially, I think, on Saturday's paper, and I was all G'd up for this, and I was all ready to go. And my editor decided the story wasn't quite ready, and I was concerned. I was and my sources, some of my sources were very, very upset because they were taking a risk. They were in sort of psychologically a very heightened state, and they were in a bit of a mess when it didn't come out. Anyway, it came out about 3 days later, and in those 3 days, I'd sort of done more work, got more things tightened up. So I think my editor's decision was completely correct, even though it was sort of quite traumatic at the time. So yeah, but we were up against it. So it only came out about whatever it was, 4 days before Oprah. It was very, very tight.
Wow, I'd never heard that story before. Thanks so much for sharing it with me. Did you feel like Harry inadvertently kind of confirmed some of your revelations in Courtiers in Spare when he talks about the employees sobbing over their desks? I mean, reading between the lines, doesn't it sound a lot like what you've said, that this was a toxic environment? Maybe Prince Harry just doesn't realize,
no, definitely.
Where the toxicity is coming from?
I definitely thought that he was confirming that. But it's very funny reading Spare, because there was a lot of interesting revelations there, a lot of stuff we didn't know, but also a lot of stuff from Harry's perspective. And you can look at it, you think, really, that's the way you saw it, but a lot of people saw things in a completely different way. No, I was just going to say that one of the fascinating things was when he complained about the media portrayal of when Meghan went on what the palace calls an away day with the Queen to Cheshire. So it was just Meghan and the late Queen, and it was a big thing. They went up by royal train. I remember I had the slot to sort of, as it were, see them off the royal train when they arrived, and it was a big story. And Harry complained in the book that the coverage had been incredibly negative. And I thought, really? And I actually went to the effort of looking up all the coverage, including in the tabloids that Harry hated so much, and it was all overwhelmingly positive.
Glowing.
It was glowing.
Yeah.
It was all about the Queen and Meghan sharing a joke, and I think the problem is that he hated the media so much that he just got himself in a complete sort of tiz about things, and he would.
He's got a filter. He's got his own filter.
He's got a filter, and he would only see the negative, and he couldn't see or remember or appreciate the positive. And the other thing I think there is, a lot of the time he doesn't necessarily read the papers. He just looks at some of the garbage that appears online, and there's a lot of garbage online, and some of it is quite often untrue and quite often unpleasant. I think Harry's absolutely right there, but that's kind of all he said. That's all he sees, because he was kind of obsessed with social media. That's why, of course, he's so anti-social media now, because
trying to change the way we engage on it here in the States, working with the Aspen Institute. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Archwell has purged employees over the last few years, whether it's audio, production, charity. We've seen it's like a revolving door when it comes to Archwell employees. And current reports are saying that American Riviera Orchard is really struggling to put together a team that Harry and Meghan, specifically Meghan, are confident in, with Netflix even suggesting maybe we step in and handle some of the retail aspects, and we'll kind of try to make it all go together with this new show she's producing with Netflix about entertaining and gardening and cooking and all these things. Do you feel like the reason that they go through employees is because their behavior is similar to when you covered this? Is there a change in behavior? Are they maturing? Are we seeing this revolving door because things are kind of the same?
I don't know. It's hard for me to speak to that, because I don't know what's going on in the States particularly. But I would say that I think Meghan probably find it quite hard. She is who she is. She always thinks she's the smartest person in the room, which it can be a problem. But it was interesting that a few months ago when they did the Invictus Games in Dusseldorf in Germany, it was fascinating seeing Harry, because he was back to his old Harry. He was relaxed. He was funny. He was at home. He just we saw a glimpse of the Harry that used to be. But in terms of their staff, well, I would never apply for a job with them. But also, they've got some new PR guy, some guy handling the media in Europe, the UK and the rest of Europe. And I get the impression that he hasn't been sort of trusted with much yet. He hasn't got the sort of top level briefings. That may have changed in recent weeks. Perhaps he's trusted more now. But I think whatever the truth was, they were sort of quite slow to let him off the leash, and I think that speaks to classic sort of Meghan behaviour.
That's right. Or the check didn't clear, Valentine. We've got to be realistic about these things. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Um, do you think Meghan's issue is insecurity at the end of the day? She talked about not knowing what box to check when she was a little girl. She told one employee, "I'm going to be your boss one day." Harry wrote an entire book called Spare. How much of Harry and Meghan's bad behavior, aside from immaturity, because I remember that famous line from Samantha Cohen in your book about how it's like dealing with teenagers. How much do you think it's insecurity, and that they don't feel like they're respected as much as the people around them, and they really struggle with that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with that. I mean, I think with Harry, it probably, a lot of it stems from the fact that he wasn't particularly academically successful at school. And I think, gets treated a certain way because of that. But of course, you got to set against that he was a really good helicopter pilot. I mean, that is difficult. Your brain has to process, to fly one of those helicopters, your brain has to process an awful lot. It's a real special skill. And he was, from what one reads, he was really good at it. So one shouldn't underestimate him. People have different sorts of intelligence. As for Meghan, she was Meghan is smart. She went to a very good university. She was always, academically successful. She's no dummy at all. But there is an insecurity there. She wants to think she's the smartest person in the room, and it's truly smart people recognize and encourage and bring out the best in others. And I'm not sure she's
that's such
necessarily
good
very good
advice.
at doing that.
I agree with you. I've heard you say before, and I felt like this was a great description of Prince Harry. He has no filter. You kind of see his pity parties, and then you've talked about Meghan's Hollywood smile, how she can, no matter what the circumstances, her posture's perfect. She's whipped a smile on her face.
Yep.
She looks elegant, and she can execute. Is it killing Harry, do you think, today? And I'm asking your opinion, and I know you're a journalist and you like to work with fact, but I'd like to know your opinion. Do you feel like it's killing Harry today, that he has to play the media game to sustain interest in his commercial ventures in America? Because he's having to do Good Morning America. He's having to sit in front of Anderson Cooper. Because at the end of the day, he signed a contract that says he's going to try to sell his book, and he's going to try to get people to watch his Netflix show. Do you think that it irritates him? Because he was so vile towards the media, towards the end of his royal life, that he has to break down and entertain this circus, I should say.
I think it's quite a different thing going on US television to consorting with the British tabloids. It was the British tabloids who he hated more than anything else. So he didn't particularly have a problem with UK television. So I think playing the media game, it's complicated. It's not just he hates them all. But I also do think it's true that Harry would have been far happier if he'd just had some kind of life completely away from the media altogether. I always thought it was a shame that he left the army. He only did one tour of duty in helicopters. I kind of thought it would have been good if he'd done two. He could have done two tours, but for some reason we were told that wasn't possible. He believed it wasn't possible or inappropriate. He then went and got a desk job, and he was obviously totally unsuited to doing a desk job. I think he would have been really happy if he'd worked in conservation in Africa. He loved Africa. He loves conservation. And if he'd gone away and sort of been some kind of game warden type figure or run a charity out there or whatever, totally invisible to the media, I think that would have been great for him. But of course, that was totally not the life that Meghan would have wanted. So that was never going to happen. But, I think that's where Harry would have been happy.
You're absolutely right. And I'm sure I'm hoping he's working behind the scenes on some of this stuff that's going on with the African Parks charity, because like we're getting so many different stories out of that, and he's a part of that. So hopefully he's dealing with that behind the scenes. I've heard you say that Meghan hates the tabloids too, but she did aggressively pursue attention from them before she met Prince Harry, and even today we're seeing her walk red carpets alone. Do you think that she wishes she could enjoy this fame that she chased a bit more, or do you think that she wishes she could enjoy this fame that she chased as a younger girl, then she's actually capable of enjoying next to Prince Harry, who would rather be in Africa working on conservation with no one knowing where he was located?
Yeah, I think she wants fame, but on her own terms. So when she was in Suits and before she'd met Harry, or then she did some interviews, did some chat shows, did things with the UN Women and so on and so forth, and other charities, and it was never critical and it was never intrusive. But as soon as it became critical or intrusive, she hated it, because it had to be on her own terms. There was a very significant moment, just from my point of view as a former royal reporter, in the early days of her being around. The idea was suggested that she and Harry might have an informal drink with the royal reporters. That sort of thing happens, and for instance, when William and Kate got engaged, we had a drink with them that evening, very informally, in St James's Palace, and it was made quite clear that this was never going to happen, because Meghan was always furious with the Sun newspaper.
But really quickly, I've seen you make the point before, and I think it's important to make, because hardly anybody ever makes this point. You said you hope that Harry and Meghan live happily ever after. You don't wish negative, you don't wish any ill on them. But in the worst case scenario, if Harry and Meghan were to separate, there's really no hope of the prodigal son returning, because at the end of the day, you feel like the children will remain in America, which I think is true, and you think Harry's going to remain with his children. Do you still feel that way? Because this is an older interview.
Without a doubt, Harry absolutely adores his children, as most parents do, I hope, and having seen up close Harry with children, I just know in my heart that he'd be a great dad. He must be a great dad. He'd be such fun as a father, and he would adore them. And if the worst comes to the worst, which there's no reason to think that it will, but if it did come to the worst, he would stay in the States. There's no way he'd cross the Atlantic and leave his children in the US. Absolutely not.
I agree with you. And how sad. How sad, because it feels like there's, then you're looking at a breakdown somewhere. And unfortunately, it's between Harry and his dad, potentially.
Yeah, okay, so, he could remain in this, let's hope their marriage stays on course. And as I said, there's no reason to think it won't at the moment. But he could stay in the States and have a repaired and improved relation with his father, and even one day with his brother, long way off, we know. The fact that you're in the States doesn't mean to say you can't have good relations, but at the moment that looks a sort of slightly distant prospect.
I agree with you. All right, Courtiers, one of the best books ever if you are a royal family junkie. I have it on audiobook, so I can revisit it whenever I need to. Valentine, you're such a sweetheart, and I'm so grateful for your time today. And you should call it, I feel like everybody should name their child Valentine. What an incredible name.
Thank you so much. Lovely talking to you, Kinsey.